Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Pension Consultants podcast. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us. My name is Zach Allen. I'm the Chief Investment Officer and Chief Executive Officer here at Pension Consultants. I am joined by Mr. Trenton Clines. Trenton is a client plan manager. He is also our Director of Vendor Outcomes, and we're going to be talking about fees today. Trenton, pretty excited about our topic?
I am. I'm excited. This is something I spend a lot of time in, so I like talking about it.
Awesome. Yeah, Trenton spends just about all day, every day looking at fees paid by our retirement plan clients, benchmarking those fees against third-party benchmarks. And then since you work directly with a handful of clients yourself, he also is communicates that to our clients and those results. So I can think of no better person to help us walk through the question and topic of fees than Mr. Clines here. So I was thinking, Trenton, just kind of get started and help us think about, kind of unwrap this problem and this question of retirement plan fees. We can maybe start by talking about the couple of different ways that retirement plan committees and retirement plan fiduciaries might benchmark and try to determine reasonableness of those fees when it comes to their own retirement plans. And so can you think of a couple of different ways that, more traditionally, or just kind of what's floating out there as far as approaches that committee members might have?
Yeah, absolutely. And this gets into really focuses in on the plan level fees. That's what everybody thinks of when you think about the fees that are coming out of my retirement plan. And that's where most people start whenever they look at benchmarking the fees that are paid out of the plan. And what has historically happened within the industry and what's been the norm for recommendations from ERISA attorneys, but isn't actually required, is the RFP every 3 to 5 years to go out and look for new advisors, new record keepers, TPAs to see what the fees look like. But whenever you do that, you're really only able to get a handful of companies included on that. You're not able to get a broad scope of what the fees actually look like for plans around your size. So what I think is probably one of the best ways to do it, and the way that we look at it, is I want to build a benchmark that is based on your plan. Look at the plan size, the amount of participants in the plan, and then pull in other plans that are around a similar size and see what their fees look like compared to the fees that you're paying, and then build out the benchmark from there and use those benchmarks to see where our fees are at. And we can get a lot more plans included in that benchmark if we do it that way, instead of just going out to do an RFP and get 5 to 10 different clients here and there.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, just a couple of points to call out there. So, there's this question of necessary and reasonable, and that's always what makes this a difficult topic and a difficult, thing to wrestle with for fiduciaries is, well, I know I'm tasked with and responsible for determining reasonableness and how necessary these fees are. But there's not a clear, ERISA doesn't just roll out a red carpet and say, well, here's how you do this. Yeah. And so you mentioned, well, what's kind of the standard right now is request for proposal, request for information. Let's go out there, let's find a couple of vendors, no matter, what vendor we're working with within the retirement plan. We'll just make that a rote process every couple of years to go out and do something like that. And in terms of that versus nothing, I imagine that's probably better than nothing.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
But maybe you mentioned, third-party benchmarks and, other benchmark providers that might be out there. Reiterate what some of those benefits are. So it's the volume. Is that really ultimately it at the end of the day? It's just the volume of those, providers that you can benchmark against are just going to be more with the third party than what you might get with an RFP.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest piece to that is the volume, because the volume that you're going to get from those third-party providers is so much more, and it's not just based on your plan. If you go out for an RFP, all of the information that you're getting is based on solely your plan and what you want to do with it, which can lead to some different conversations on whether it's reasonable or what you're looking at there. But when you go out for a third party benchmark and that's put together, it's looking at all of the plans that are around a similar size to yours, and you're able to get a little bit more in depth on what other people are doing to see why fees might be higher, why fees might be a little lower, and those third party benchmarks, one, provide the volume, but also get a little bit of outside insight into how the plan's running and different options that you have there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Um, we collect internally within our firm, this is all publicly available information, which I think the kind of old school approach of RFP, we'll go out and look at 3 or 5 different firms, so much less optimal is that, the Department of Labor has all the Form 5500 that's just out there available for anybody to use. So a lot of the third-party benchmark providers, they'll leverage that. They might leverage some other industry sources. Again, the idea is you're looking at volume. You're not looking at just a couple plans or a couple vendors. You're looking at the whole gamut. And I mentioned the fact that we ingest that data ourselves. It's about I want to say there was 650,000 401k and 403b plans out there, and so it kind of puts that into perspective when you're just looking at maybe a smaller volume. Okay, so that kind of helps set the stage for when it comes to, we have a plan, we need to benchmark things. Here's the couple of different approaches that we have in order to accomplish that. So the next piece starts to come down to understanding what are those different fees, and that's not exactly so straightforward, is it? Just understanding what a plan fee is and how much is paid, and how complicated of a question is that?
Well, that's a great way to frame it, because it is a very complicated question, and there's so much to it and so many layers to it in different ways that fees can be hidden by the vendors that you're working with, and so we really want to break it down into three different fee categories. The first one is the plan level fees. That's your record keeper fee, advisor fee, auditor, ERISA attorney, things like that are all built into those plan level fees. That's the basics. That's what everybody's looking at. If you have had a recent lawsuit that you've seen, it's most likely going to be around one of those areas. So that's the big piece. That's what most people focus on. But there's 2 other layers to it that get a little bit deeper and are where a lot of plans are losing money on a consistent basis. The second one is participant level fees. These are fairly standard across most plans, but this is the cost for a participant taking a distribution, a loan origination fee, a loan payment, things along those lines, or installment distribution fees that the participant has to pay that come out of the participant's own bucket of money whenever at their request. And those are something that they may not seem like a big fee at first, but if you're a plan with a couple thousand participants and you have high turnover and participants are taking distributions on a consistent basis, those $50 distribution fees can stack up pretty quick for a record keeper, and they make a lot of money there, but it's not reported anywhere on the benchmarking that we collect and we're looking at on the plan level, right? So there's a lot of pieces there where you need to keep an eye on. A lot of them are pretty standard on that level, but it's good to still compare and see what other vendors are offering and what the benchmarks are there. The third one is where we get a little bit into the weeds, and that's our indirect compensation. So indirect compensation really covers a lot of different areas and kind of blurs the line sometimes between the participant directed or participant level fees and that indirect compensation. The first thing that comes to mind that we talk about quite a bit is managed accounts and how managed accounts are benchmarked, or if they are benchmarked at all. And because those fees are taken out at the participant's request, but they're not shown up they're not showing up anywhere in the fee data that the record keeper shows or the advisor shows. So they're making a lot of money on the back end on that, that they are able to then lower their overall fee. But the other areas too, you look at with indirect compensation or some of those revenue sharing or 12B1 fees that are generated from the investments, and used to discount some of the fees that you get from your record keeper or your advisor. And those can be beneficial. They can be good to lower those fees, but more times than not, the amount of revenue generated is more than the discount that you're getting from those record keepers, and that's what we want to look into and keep an eye on, and that's where we see the biggest holes in the benchmarking side of things. Is there's a lot of these smaller areas that aren't quite as clear, where people don't have to directly state how much they're making on these other avenues, that make it really difficult to benchmark. But it's something everybody needs to keep a close eye on.
Yeah, that's really great. The RFP, to kind of create the sequence, the RFP is kind of where the industry lived for a while. We're moving to better plan level fee benchmarking, as we discussed. But that the buck doesn't stop there, right? So you've got these participant level fees, you've got the indirect compensation. So as a committee member, the more that you can move from here to here to here, the better, right? That's moving in the right direction. But really, if you want to, make the most impact on your participants in your retirement plan, you really want to fulfill that obligation. It becomes more just understanding, rather than just understanding those plan level fees that hopefully you have a good grasp on. You may not be paying as much attention to some of these other fees that don't show up on those plan level reports.
Yeah, absolutely.
And often too, there's kind of a bit of a pressure right within the industry to bring, since there's so many eyeballs here at the plan level, bring these fees down. But what might be happening is that things are popping up, on these other two categories as well. Okay, well that's interesting. So, where else would a fiduciary who's wanting to really wrap their head around this, if they're would you say for some of these other types of fees, should they be looking at this on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis? Do you have any ideas or thoughts as far as how often we might want to evaluate maybe some of those participant level fees?
Yeah, I think ideally it's good to keep an eye on it on a quarterly basis. So if you're able to track those participant level fees and see how much are being paid out, and find a benchmark, then that's fantastic. But just to keep an eye on it, really, when we're looking at benchmarking and evaluating it, we want to look at least, at the very least, on an annual basis, where you're going in to look at what those participant directed fees are, how much they are adding up over time. And if you're in a plan where you see, we have a lot of distributions, those distributions are piling up, and they're making more money on the distributions than they are on the normal record keeping services, then that's a situation where you can go to your record keeper and say, hey, this is higher than we expected. We need to look at doing a renegotiation. And I think looking at it annually definitely gives you a good idea of where the plan is at, and what to expect moving forward. But definitely at least annually, and then if you can, quarterly.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I want to take some of this and pivot to potentially, maybe the right framing, or what might help us. All these different fee types, and some show up on some reports and some don't on others. As a fiduciary, again, it's reasonable, it's necessary. That's the standard that we're operating within. So then comes this concept of maybe economic impact and economic cost, because you're responsible for that outcome, the outcome that the participant receives. And maybe if we have a low record keeping fee here, but there's some more expensive fund or some other fund that doesn't perform as well, that's being, that's part of the agreement, right, with the
Hmm.
record keeper to get those low plan level fees. How do we assess maybe the economic impact of that, or how can we evaluate? Okay, we're getting a better deal here, but maybe a worse deal over here,
Hmm.
and is that fair? Is that reasonable? Is that what I should be doing as a
Hmm.
fiduciary? How do we digest that problem?
That's a really good question because it's it is that's what's happening in the industry is, as you mentioned earlier, there's pressure to lower fees and they're coming up in other places, and the route to do that has more of an economic impact than a direct impact to the plan, as far as the base fee level. But the way that you get around it is trying to make sure the fees are transparent as possible. So revenue sharing is a really big option for some of the fee discounting, and lowering those overall plan fees. But there's really not a good way, if you have the revenue sharing, to get a clear picture of what would my fees be, what are they now. If you can get to the lowest share class, if you're able to get in the cheapest share class option, cut down on that revenue sharing as much as possible, and keep the expense ratios, that difference in the expenses for those funds, keep that in the pocket of the participants, keep that money in their plan, and then you can see how the fees are impacted after that. And then if you look at your fees afterwards and say, well, these are too high, then you were most likely paying too much in a roundabout way prior to that as well. So the first one is looking at the revenue sharing, and some of those fee agreements that record keepers have, and getting to the point where you're comfortable knowing that what you're actually paying, and have a transparent number that you can look at, say, this is what I'm paying, this is how it compares to plans around my size. And when we look at that through the revenue sharing lens, that's a little easier to cut out, where you can say we got moved into the lower share class, we cut out revenue sharing, and now we have a more clear picture. Some of those options aren't quite as easy to see, and another area that we talk about is the stable value side, and we won't get too into the weeds of it, but essentially the record keepers their guarantee a specific rate, and then whatever the fund does on top of that, they're able to keep. And there's a reason why they push it so much for all of the funds, or all the clients that they have, is because they generate a lot of revenue off of that. And at least with revenue sharing, we have an idea of how much revenue is generated, how much is applied to the discount. With the stable value funds, there's really not a good way out there right now to track that. So it's something we need to be very aware of, and keep an eye on. And
Mm-hmm.
then the last one with managed accounts, those are something that you need to educate your participants on. They need to know if it's something that you want to offer. They need to know if that's something that they want to do, and it's not just a one-click button where if you ask, "Yes, I need help," they're automatically enrolled into that type of a plan, and they don't really understand what they're getting themselves into. So, if you're going with the managed accounts, you need to educate participants, and make sure that it's good for the participants. And there's a different conversation we can get into about benchmarking those themselves and how they perform, which might tie a little more into investments. Um, but when you're looking at those indirect fees, the most important part is being transparent, and that's where we need to get to.
Yeah, that's great. I think the best thing as a fiduciary, number one, you should be operating under. I genuinely want to do what's in the best interest of the participants in this plan. That's
Absolutely.
always a good place to
Yeah,
start.
absolutely.
Um, and assuming we're doing that, and assuming that's our goal and our objective, it sounds like it's pretty important for some of these more nuanced conversations and topics around,
Hmm.
some of these indirect compensation pieces, or there's an earnest attempt to understand the real direct expenses,
Hmm.
the value, the economic cost that maybe doesn't show
Hmm.
up on reports, and to document and evaluate
Hmm.
the reasonableness, at least from bar minimum, just being able to show that this is something as a committee we're wrestling with. And you mentioned stable value. That's something we're having a lot more conversations about, over the past couple of years, because there was that, for the longest time, they were offering a higher rate of interest than money market. So it seemed pretty clear. Offer this with your plan. There's a higher yield for those participants, and you'll get a discount on your fee. But now what's happening is they don't necessarily always offer a higher yield. They may offer a lower yield than an equivalent money market. So you're still getting that discount, but you really need to be documenting. You need to be demonstrating that you're evaluating it. You understand those differences, and we're considering the overall impact to the participant, not just those dollars, not just those fees.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, great, Trent. I think we covered a lot of different topics and different things that I think are going to be most critical at a high level for understanding retirement plan fees, determining reasonableness, evaluating them at that level. Do you have any closing thoughts or any guidance? Maybe there's some new committee members out there who are just getting started with the retirement plan and are trying to wrap their head around this, complicated world of retirement plans. Any last closing words of wisdom for them or perspectives?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and you mentioned it just a minute ago, is if you're coming from a place of I want to do what's best for the participants in the plan, and you are taking that approach, and you look into these things and you research, you try to find as much transparency as you can within some of these things that aren't always transparent, and you're doing your best to figure out where those fees actually are, what the participants are paying, and how that compares to plans around your size. You cover a lot of your bases there, and you're doing a good job for your participants and for your plan. But it's just continuing to do it and keeping an eye on it and making sure that there's some consistency to it, and keep pushing towards more transparency within the plans. And if you're doing that, you're doing what's right for your participants, and 99.9% of the time, that due diligence is going to be enough to most likely put your participants on track to do a little better in their retirement plan. And that's all we can ask for.
Right. Well, that's great. Trenton, thank you so much for your time. This was sage advice. And thank you all for listening in and joining in. Again, Zach Allen, this is Trenton Clines. We're the Pension Consultants. If you have any questions, you can go to our website, pension-consultants.com. Feel free to reach out, connect with us if there's anything that we may be able to help you with your retirement plan. But thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.